So what should we expect from this next phase of hybrid work? Well, to talk about that, I'm joined today by Colette Stallbaumer. She's General Manager of Microsoft 365 and Future of Work at Microsoft. Hi, Colette.
Hi, Linda. Great to be here.
Well, thank you so much for being here. We have a lot to talk about. Well, I don't want to say hybrid work started in 2020, but the experiment really started in 2020. But before we even get to that, let me ask you about your own career. How did you end up, managing this experiment?
Yes. So, yeah, I've been at Microsoft a long time, actually, and I've had a variety of roles. But most recently, before my current role, I was in Satya Nadella's office. I joined his team when he became CEO in 2014 and was his speechwriter. And I worked on a couple of things, but one of the really interesting things I worked on was our cultural transformation at Microsoft. And so when the opportunity came up to lead the team working on the future of work in Microsoft 365, I jumped at that opportunity to sit in this role that sits at the intersection of culture and technology and how we empower people at work. And I just find that to be really energizing and part of what gets me up every day and excites me to come to work.
Well, that's cool. You know what? We could talk about a lot of parts of this, but if you had to pick one thing you've learned over the last 2 years, what would you pick?
Oh my gosh. I think, starting there, I would sort of want to zoom out and talk about just kind of what happened when the pandemic
Sure.
happened and
Okay.
and Microsoft's approach. When the pandemic happened, we do a lot of research at Microsoft, as
Mhm.
you probably in your audience probably knows. But really, what happened is we were inundated with questions from customers about how to deal with this new world of remote work, and what we were learning. And so we really did take a learn it all approach and pivoted our efforts and research to studying the new patterns of work and how it was changing. And it was changing and continues to change very rapidly. And so we began publishing something called the Work Trend Index. Our most recent report was published in September. We can get into unpacking some of the data and insights from that. But in this last report, we spoke with 20,000 people in 11 countries. We then also look at not just what people are telling us, but what the telemetry in Microsoft 365 is telling us. So we analyze trillions of signals on how work is actually changing and what the patterns are. And so we know, for example, that the average workday span is increasing and that people are chatting more after hours and on weekends. And then we also look at LinkedIn labor market data trends and analysis and Glint people science. And we sort of mash all that up to understand how work is changing. And in our latest study that we published, we talk about something called productivity paranoia, which is the fact that, now, as you said, 8, 9, call it months into hybrid work, not everyone agrees on how this experiment is going. And in particular, we see a disconnect between leaders and employees. And so, we can get into that more, but that's kind of what underlies productivity paranoia is the fact that, employees, 87% of employees say that they are productive, working however, whenever, wherever. And at the same time, only 12% of leaders have confidence that people are being productive. And so it kind of starts with that, right? Like what's underneath that?
Okay, well, let's take it a bit at a time. First of all, in a few words, what is the biggest feeling, the biggest trend you're getting from the most recent index, if you could summarize it?
I would say the biggest trend from the most recent work trend index is really this idea of productivity paranoia, right? And that's the fact that 87% of employees say, and people say they're being productive. And, we believe flexibility and well-being are here to stay, and people are wanting to work that way. They found, the habits that people have formed during the pandemic, working and being productive, working kind of however they work best, whenever, wherever they work best. At the same time, leaders, only 12% of leaders in our study have full confidence that people are being productive. And so, what does that mean? I would say what's going on there is, at least in one sense, leaders are missing the traditional cues, right? They're missing those cues of what it used to mean to understand what it means to be productive, of the visual cues of being able to walk down the hall and check in on people and see those things in action.
Yeah, and I would say they weren't trained to do it in any other way, right? This has been
That's
forced
right.
on them. So for the ones who are doing better at it, like how are they monitoring work?
Well, first of all, let me just say that at Microsoft, we don't believe that, monitoring activity or monitoring employees is the answer. We believe that, that really what organizations need to do is focus on outcomes, focus on impact and outcomes. Measuring or monitoring activity is really just bad science. It doesn't help companies or leaders understand what's really going on, and really, do people have the right conditions to be productive and empowered and energized to do meaningful work.
Yeah, I shouldn't have put it as monitor, but if the ones who
Yeah.
are confident that their workers are doing well, what are the things, the signals they're picking up on?
Yeah, I think it is, part of it is, I think, in this ability to give people permission to work in new ways. Right. As we've studied this throughout the pandemic, when we published our study in March of last year of 2020, we saw, just a very big shift in what we would call people's worth it equation. And, things like flexibility and well-being, really people saying for the first time that they valued those more than even things like pay.
Hmm.
And so, there's a big change in what people value. And, because we often talk about how, maybe if the pandemic had been a couple month blip, and, we don't know that some of these things would have taken hold as much as they now have, right? But we've been working this way for 2.5 years. And people have figured out how to more integrate their work in their life, right? And what does work really mean? What does it look like? Just because someone goes for a run over their lunch hour doesn't mean they're actually not working,
Hmm.
right? That could be some of their most creative time, right? Maybe they come up with like their best idea of the day or the week or the year while they're on that run. And so it really is this mindset shift around understanding how people work and creating space for people to work more flexibly.
Now you mentioned work hours. What is the latest data showing? Because at the beginning, people didn't really know how to stop working, right?
That's right. And I would even say that we are still in that place.
Hmm.
I think that we have created some of the new habits that were created during the past 2.5 years that aren't all positive, right? I mean, the not only has the pace of work increased according to our data, but some of what you're saying, right? Like the blending of work and life. There's a good side to that, and then there's a side where people have developed some habits, and we need to help them, create new rituals and set new boundaries. Like the fact that, I'll give you an example. We moved as an organization and a team to have breaks between meetings. There's a feature you can use in Outlook, so you can set all of your meetings as an organization wide to start at 5 minutes after the hour, or end 5 minutes early. And even that 5 minute break gives people's brains a chance to reset between back-to-back meetings. And so, additionally, we have what we call team agreement. And really what that is coming up with what are the new rules of the road, right? As we all experiment with this. So how do you, in flexible work, because you don't have those artificial boundaries anymore, like the commute, to how do you create that separation, right? So people can make a mental shift. And one of the things we do with our team agreement is we don't send email after 6 p.m. Now, does that mean that we never send email after 6 p.m. or on weekends? No. What it means is that we try to create that as a practice, as a ritual. And then, of course, there are exceptions to every rule. But those kinds of things are helping people find the new boundaries, if you will.
Do you find in Microsoft or in other companies that managers have needed actual training, or are they just kind of figuring it out themselves?
Yeah, I think managers need a lot of help. We're asking so much of managers in this new world of work. In addition to all the things that, that are still on their plates, right? We're also asking them in some ways to be now event coordinators too, to help figure out when and how to bring people together in person and what the role of the office is in hybrid work. We found in our work trend index that overwhelmingly more than 80% of people told us that the number one reason they would come into the office is for each other. So we asked a lot of different things about what would motivate people to come back into the office. And so now, it's on managers to help people, to help with that in-person time, right? Both coordinating when their team will be in the office and when people should come in and how to spend that time once they're there. So I think, to come back around to your question, managers definitely need guidance and training for how to enable hybrid work. It's a new skill set. It's a new skill set for all of us.
Colette, we sometimes talk about the water cooler effect, that, when people are hanging around the water cooler or in the kitchen, they make connections, and one way or another, those are good for work. If you have workers at home or working virtually, how do you recreate that? And I know there's been a lot of experimentation. Early pandemic, people tried all kinds of things. What's working?
I think in some ways, the simplest way to think about that water cooler effect comes back to just human connection, right? That we're all people, we're all human, and we all need that connection. And so, one thing that, again, sounds really simple is small talk. Like, what is the value of small talk? Both at the beginning and ends of meetings, as well as in one-on-ones. At Microsoft, we have a framework for managers that we use called Model Coach Care. And throughout the pandemic, we've learned again and again that the care piece of that is so important. How are you showing up in your engagements with people when you're asking someone how they're doing? Are you pausing to listen to the answer? Are you waiting and willing to really hear what they have to say about that? And so whether it's in person, and I think there is a role for in-person in hybrid work, or digitally, I think it really comes back, that water cooler effect comes back to human connection.
Do you think that workers do need to see each other physically? Like, is it okay to have one working in Vancouver and one working in Toronto and they don't actually see each other? Do you think there's a necessity to bring people together?
I think that in-person plays a role in hybrid work, and I think we're still learning. And we're kind of in the early innings on that, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that, what we're doing, for example, in my team is we're trying to find our centers of gravity, right? So we're experimenting. And so what does that mean? That means, like, on Thursdays, we have team Thursday. And we're picking that day not to be dogmatic, to tell people you must come in on Thursdays, but to create some momentum, right, around some new rituals. And so on Thursdays is a day when more people are making more of an effort to come into the office and spend some time in person. At the same time, we're also planning and about to have in a couple of weeks Team Week. And so, like a lot of companies, Microsoft hired from everywhere during the pandemic. We want to attract and retain the best talent. And if I even just look at my own team, I have, people on the team from both, Atlanta and other places, as well as here in Washington State, as well as, overseas. And so we're taking that opportunity with Team Week to fly everyone in, to help build those bonds and create social connection and rebuild and build new bonds, because a lot of people are new, right? But I think the key thing about how we will use that in-person time during Team Week is it will not be sitting in a lot of meetings. It will be really socializing and interacting and doing activities that are intentional around rebuilding bonds.
Yeah, I've wondered about conferences, whether we're just going to see a lot more conferences internally, externally, because people do connect, right? And you can't always recreate that a different way.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about corporate culture, because this is something that comes up a lot. The companies say, you know what, we can't build a culture if people aren't together more. And I'm not sure if that's true. I think you have to build it a different way. So what are the things you've learned about that?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, when I talk to customers, we see all sorts of models, right? We see companies who've gone fully remote and, definitely are figuring out how to build culture, right? And how to create that connection to mission and culture. We see companies like Microsoft with policies where there's, with flexible work up to 50% of the time. And then you see also, the other end of the spectrum, right? With people's really either their policies mandating a certain number of days back in the office and those kinds of things. And I think there's room on the spectrum really for all of it. I think that one thing that is clear though, is that I'll go back to what I talked about, employees worth it equation, and how much they value flexibility and well-being and the ability to give people permission to go to that soccer game or not miss that kid's event, so and still be productive and do their job well. And so I think part of it is now, what role does technology play in enabling all these new ways of working, right? With a more distributed than ever before global workforce and a more digitally connected one, technology like Microsoft Teams and Viva can do a lot to create that culture and connect people.
So we're 2 years into this, Colette, and people felt one way 2 years ago. Now they've had time to try different things. Are we still getting resistance to this model?
I think I talk to customers all the time, and there's a spectrum, right? There's companies like ours who have flexible work policies of up to 50% of the time, which is what we do at Microsoft. There are companies who've gone fully remote, and they are definitely finding ways to create that connection to mission and culture. And then you've got companies who are mandating, a certain number of days back in the office and in person. So I think that technology can play a huge role in this more distributed work world where people are more digitally connected than ever before to help continue to bridge those gaps, right? If there's resistance, I think it's because we're all still learning. And I think it's really natural. We're in the early innings of experimentation on a lot of this. I think we're going to need to think about space differently. And we're seeing new models in that as well. Like, how do you think about space in a hybrid work world? And I have great empathy for customers who definitely are trying to figure out how to bring people back, how often, what will motivate them, and how to bring people together, and for what purposes.
Okay, so maybe this is, I would say it's a fair question, but if you had to figure out what was going to happen in 5 years, I won't say, what will it look like, but what are the trends you're looking at? What are the things that you think are worth considering?
Yeah. I think there's a lot on the horizon. I think that, the first thing that comes to mind is I think we're going to understand in 5 years a lot more about when in-person time matters. How much in-person time matters, right? Like, and specifically when and why and how often to bring people together, and what are the dividends, right? What pays dividends from that? How do you take early in career people and pair them with leaders who are longer in career, and how many touch points do you need in person to help that person feel really connected to mission and culture? I think that we will still see, a flexible work world, but that it will have evolved. And so I have a lot of optimism and hope for continuing to enable new ways of working to help people however, whenever, wherever they want to work, but also help individuals and help organizations be successful.
Okay, well, that's probably a good note to end it on, since it's always nice to hear about optimism. Colette, thank you so much for talking to me today.
Thank you so much for having me, Linda.
Colette Stallbaumer is the General Manager of Microsoft 365 and Future of Work for Microsoft.